In this video, we'll cover some questions about Chapter 3, Learning and Illness. First, I will run through the questions with you and then get back and try to answer each question by checking the slide that related to this question. So now I would like to give you the questions without any answer. Question number one, define the following terms. These terms are the factors that influence or affect learning, conditioned response or CR, reinforcer, unconditioned response or UCR, negative reinforcement, learning, maturation, unconditioned stimulus or UCS, positive reinforcement, conditioned stimulus or CS. This is the first question and try to come up with the answer by yourself. Now the second question is write short notes about the following. Number one, according to the Pavlovian conditioning, clarify the meaning of generalization, discrimination, spontaneous recovery, and complete extinction. Number two, write short notes about the four-step sequence in the learning by observation. Question number three, put true or false and correct the false statement. Number one, the changes in behavior which result from factors such as drugs are not considered learned behaviors. Again, the changes in behavior which result from factors such as drugs are not considered learned behaviors. Number two, the changes in behavior which result from factors such as fatigue are not considered learned behaviors. The changes in behavior which result from factors such as fatigue are not considered learned behaviors. Number three, the changes in behavior which result from factors such as damage to the central nervous system are considered learned behaviors. The changes in behavior which result from factors such as damage to the central nervous system are considered learned behaviors. Number four, temporary state of changes are not considered learned behavior. Temporary state of changes are not considered learned behaviors. Maturation is a change in behavior resulting from natural growth of a nervous structure. Maturation is a change in behavior resulting from the natural growth of a nervous structure. Maturation of a function is a prerequisite for training that function to take place. Maturation of a function is a prerequisite for training that function to take place. Results of training or practice are not considered learned behaviors. Results of training or practice are not considered learned behaviors. Walking or speaking cannot be learned until the relevant physiological and neural components have matured. Walking or speaking cannot be learned until the relevant physiological and neural components have matured. We learn positive habits or bad habits also. We learn positive habits or bad habits also. Through the application of classical conditioning, we can interpret and treat phobia. Through the application of classical conditioning, we can interpret and treat phobia. According to Pavlov, the key words in forming a new association are pairing, repetition, elimination, and measuring. The secondary reinforcement satisfies the need by itself. The secondary reinforcement satisfied the need by itself. We learn normal behavior or abnormal behavior. We learn normal behavior or abnormal behavior. Conditioned stimulus or CS is unlearned stimulus. Conditioned stimulus is unlearned stimulus. The technique for treating this kind of an anxiety or phobia depends on inhibiting of an anxiety by teaching the individual some competing response, especially relaxation. The technique for treating this kind of an anxiety or phobia depends on inhibiting of an anxiety by teaching the individual some competing response, especially relaxation. Unconditioned response is the natural response to the unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned response is the natural response to the unconditioned stimulus. In shaping, rewards are given to every small improvement in the direction of the desired behavior or response. In shaping, rewards are given to every small improvement in the direction of the desired behavior or response. We learn good behavior or bad behavior. Partial intermittent reinforcement is more effective in establishing greater strength of conditioning. Partial intermittent reinforcement is more effective in establishing greater strength of conditioning. Through learning, establishing new habits, or we can establish new habits. New habits. We can establish new habits or new habits. Through learning, we can weaken certain responses. Through learning, we can weaken certain responses. Through learning, we can strengthen certain responses. Through learning, we can inhibit or deform habits. Through learning, we can inhibit or deform habits. According to the cognitive theories, learning equals habit formation or an association between stimulus and response. According to the cognitive theories, learning equals habit formation or an association between stimulus and response. Associative theories emphasize the role of thinking, understanding, memory, and other cognitive processes. Associative theories emphasize the role of thinking, understanding, memory, and other cognitive processes. Partial reinforcement is favored in the early stages of learning. Is favored in the early stages of learning. Now complete the following sentences. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of or we learn most of our behavior such as operant conditioning theory developed by to figure out the factors that influence or affect learning you should study the to understand how does learning take place you should be acquainted with associative theories are such as and cognitive theories in learning are such as classical conditioning theory developed by the classical conditioning experiments are carried out by factors that affect learning are such as we need 5 factors in this question. Secondary reinforcements are such as the social learning theory is developed by learning by observation occurs vicariously by modeling and imitation in a four-step sequence. These four-step sequence are that's all about our questions. Now I will get back and try to answer each question with you. The first question, definition. What about or define the factors that influence or affect learning? Please go and check this slide and you will find the answer. This slide shows you factors that affect learning, including maturation, motivation, repetition and training, fatigue, reinforcement, feedback, cognitive functions such as attention, memory, perception, and so on. The definition of CR or conditioned response, it is the response to the conditioned stimuli. You should also be acquainted with the definition of conditioned stimulus. Conditioned stimulus, it is a new stimulus. It is a neutral stimulus that never elicited the saliva response before. And also you have to know what is the meaning of UCR. UCR, unconditioned response. It is a natural response to the unconditioned stimulus And what about the unconditioned stimulus? Sorry, this is the unconditioned response. This is that is the unconditioned stimulus. It is the natural stimulus which is capable of eliciting a certain response without any prior conditioning. Now get back to questions. I think now we will be able to define UCR. What about reinforcer and what about the negative reinforcements? Please check this slide. This is the definition of reinforcer. It is a reward or anything or event which follows come after is given after a certain desirable response and tends to increase the probability of its occurrence. So we have two main characteristics of the enforcer. Number one, it must come after the desirable response. And number two, it should increase the probability of its occurrence. And we differentiated between continuous reinforcement and partial reinforcement. In continuous reinforcement, the organism is reinforced every single time. But in partial or intermittent reinforcement, it is a type of scheduling reinforcer. And as we said before, continuous reinforcement is favored in the early stages of learning, but in generally, the partial intermittent reinforcement is more effective in establishing conditioning. And also we differentiated between positive and negative reinforcement. The definition of positive reinforcement, it means to give something liked or desired or wanted, satisfy a need. But negative reinforcement, it could be achieved by terminating or stopping painful stimuli or events. And we have to know the difference between positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. And we have, as we said before, some keywords: give, take, like, dislike, desired, undesired. And in positive reinforcement, you give something like to the organism after doing a desired response. But in positive punishment, we give something hated or disliked to the organism after doing undesired response. Negative reinforcement, you take something from the organism, but this something is disliked or painful after doing a desired response. But if you take something desirable or liked to the individual or the organism after an undesired response, in this case, this is negative punishment. Also, we differentiated between primary and the secondary reinforcer. The primary reinforcer is the primary satisfier for the need. So it is a primary reinforcement satisfies the need by itself. But the secondary reinforcer cannot satisfy the need by itself, but through it we can get some primary reinforcement which will be able to satisfy our needs. So we can get some primary satisfied for our needs. And we give two examples such as money, token, economy. Okay, according to that, now you are able to define reinforcer, negative reinforcement, and also you will be able to define positive reinforcement. Now, what is the definition of learning and the definition of maturation? What is the definition? Now go and check this slide. This is the definition of learning, a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of practice or training, and this is the definition of maturation. Maturation also is a change in behavior resulting from natural growth of a nervous structure or nervous system. So maturation could be viewed as or could be seen as a prerequisite for training that function to take place. I think now you are able to define UCS and CS. That's all in the first question definition. Now write short notes about the following terms or the following concepts or the following phrases. Write short note about the generalization, clarify the meaning of generalization, discrimination, spontaneous recovery, complete extinction. And also write short notes about the four step sequence in learning by observation. Please check this slide. We have 5 slides. They show us the meaning of generalization, discrimination, extinction, spontaneous recovery, complete extinction. So in order to be able to clarify the meaning of each one, generalization, it means a confusion between conditioned stimuli because of their resemblance. What about discrimination? I mean, discrimination could be achieved only by it could be achieved by only presenting the UCS after the correct CS. What about extinction? Extinction happen when you present the CS, the conditioned stimulus, many times without or after stopping the unconditioned stimulus. So the conditioned response will disappear or stop. What about spontaneous recovery after arrest or removal the organism from the experimental situation? What happened now? The conditioned stimulus will be able to elicit again once again the conditioned response. So what about complete extinction? If you continue to present the conditioned stimulus without the unconditioned stimulus, many times what happened, the spontaneous recovery becomes weaker and weaker and weaker and then stop. What about the 4 steps in observational learning? We have 4 steps and we can check these slides. This is the 4 steps sequence about the 4 steps. Number 1, attention, and the individual needs to pay attention to the model. Number 2, retention. The individual should remember the action done by the model, and then we have reproduction. It means the ability to perform the behavior that the model has just demonstrated, and in order to do that you should be motivated. You can write short notes about the 4 steps from these 4 slides. And also you can add some about the factors that influence observational learning. You can add some about these factors, which be sorted in 3 categories: observer attributes, model factors, and consequences. Now put true or false and correct the false statement. Statement number 1, the changes in behavior which result from factors such as drugs are not considered learned behavior. Yes, true. The changes in behavior which result from factors such as fatigue are not considered learned behavior. Yes, also true. The changes in behavior which result from factors such as damage to the central nervous system are considered learned behavior. No, false, are not considered. Temporary state of changes are not considered learned behavior. Yes, because learning is not a temporary state. It is permanent change in behavior, as we said before. Maturation is a change in behavior resulting from natural growth of a nervous system. Yes, true. Maturation of a function is a prerequisite for training that function to take place. Yes, true. Results of training or practice are not considered learned behavior. Are not considered? No, it is considered learned behavior. Any results of training and practice are considered learning behaviors or learned behaviors. Maturation is a change in behavior resulting from natural growth of nervous system. Yes, okay, we finished this. Okay. Walking or speaking cannot be learned until the relevant physiological and neutral components have matured. Yes, sure. We learn positive habits or bad habits also, and the bad habits also. Yes. Through the application of classical conditioning, we can interpret or explain and treat phobia. Yes. According to Pavlov, the key words in forming a new association are bearing, repetition, elimination, and measuring. Yes, sure. This is the four key concepts or the four keywords: bearing, repetition, elimination, and measuring, according to Pavlov theory, and how the association could be formed. The secondary reinforcement satisfies the need by itself. No, the primary. No, false. The primary. We learn normal behavior or abnormal behavior. Yes, true. CS conditioned stimulus is unlearned stimulus. Conditioned, unlearned? No, it is learned stimulus. It is neutral, so it is learned stimulus. Which is unlearned is the unconditioned stimulus. But conditioned is learned, unconditioned is unlearned. The technique for treating phobia, so unlearned, false. The technique for treating this kind of anxiety or phobia depends on inhibiting of anxiety by teaching the individual some competing response such as relaxation. Sure. Yes. UCR, unconditioned response, is the natural response to the unconditioned stimulus. Yes, true. In shaping, rewards are given to every small improvement in the direction of the desired behavior or response. Yes, true. We learn good behavior or bad behavior. Yes, true. Partial intermittent reinforcement is more effective in establishing greater strengths of conditioning. Yes, true. Through learning, we can establish new habits. Through learning, we can weaken certain response. We can strengthen certain response. All of this true. Through learning, we can inhibit or deform habits. Yes, true. According to the cognitive theories, learning equals habit formation or an initiation between stimulus and the response. No, false. This is according to the associative theories. So false. And the correction is according to associative theories, learning equals habit formation. Associative theories emphasize the role of thinking, understanding, memory. No, this is the cognitive theories. False. The correct answer is cognitive theories emphasize the role of thinking, understanding, memory, and other cognitive processes. Partial reinforcement is favored in the early stages. No, continuous reinforcement, which is preferred or is favored in the early stages of learning. Now complete the following sentences. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of training or practice. We learn most of our behaviors, such as our skills, our habits, some of our abilities, our social behavior. Operant conditioning theory developed by Skinner. To figure out the factors that influence or affect learning, you should study the learning theories. To understand how does learning take place, you should be acquainted with learning theories. Associative theories are such as classical conditioning theory and instrumental conditioning theory. Cognitive theories in learning are such as social learning or learning by observation theory. Classical conditioning theory developed by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. The classical conditioning experiments are carried out by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. Factors that affect learning are such as we have some factors like feedback, fatigue, all cognitive functions such as perception, attention, memory, repetition or frequency, feedback, motivation, all of these factors can affect learning. And you have to mention five of these factors. Secondary reinforcement are such as token economy and the money. The social learning theory is developed by Bandura. Learning by observation occurs vicariously by modeling and imitation in a four-step sequence. Number one, attention. Number two, retention. Number three, reproduction. And the number four, motivation. That's all about our questions. Thank you.